Velvet lock. Locks are like people. Most of them want to open if you touch them like they're not stupid. I tell this to apprentices and they nod like I'm giving them poetry, but it's just mechanics with good manners. A cylinder is a chorus of pins that only stands in harmony for one song. You sing the right tune, you go through. Sing badly, and the door pretends it has principles. I'm Marco. I keep a small shop with a crooked window on a street where the florist opens first and the bar closes last. My bench is scarred by brass shavings and coffee rings. The pegboard behind it holds my lives in order. Picks, tension wrenches, plug followers, tubular key tools, bump hammers wrapped in suede so they don't look like violence. Above the register hangs a tin sign that once sold cigars and now sells the idea that I am always open to the right knock. She walked in a little after noon on a weekday that had convinced itself it was important. The bell above the door, a cheap tin thing with good manners, cleared its throat. She took off her sunglasses like a person used to being believed. "Are you Marco?" she asked. It wasn't a question. "I've been accused," I said, straightening up. She smiled, small, specific. "My name is Lena Marceau. In this city, Marceau lives on museum plaques and startup accelerators and the kind of buildings that apologize for being rich by hearing the right architect. Her husband, Adrian, buys solutions and sells futures. I had seen them in photos. His hand riding the small of her back for the camera, her face turned half away, as if the air had asked her a better question. "What needs opening?" I asked. "An interior door," she said. "Old building. It sticks when it's tired. I need it unstuck without scaring it. And I don't want anyone else in my apartment to notice you were there." "Discretion is cheaper if you pay cash," I said, and she laughed the way someone with very good knives laughs at a kitchen joke. She gave me an address with a lobby that had learned to look bored at famous faces. The elevator made a point of not hurrying. When the doors opened, it did so with a sigh that had opinions. Lena held the door like a doorman, and I walked past her into rooms that made the city behave. "We're renovating," she said, though the apartment did not agree. Velvet at the windows, the kind of rug you feel under your nails, a grand piano the color of new oil waiting to be touched by someone who deserved it. On the credenza, a bowl empty except for a single key that had the awkward heft of money trying to look simple. She led me down a hallway that's sure of its own acoustics. The door at the end had a European mortise, hand-aged brass plate, and a lock that had seen better lubricants. "It's a studio," she said. "Mine. The latch throws when it's in the mood to remind me who built the place." "I'll be kind," I said, kneeling. The brass smelled like old coins and impatience. I set a hook pick in and met the pins one by one. "Locks aren't gatekeepers," I said, more to the cylinder than to her. "They're librarians. They like order. If you misfile something, they won't help you find it again." She watched me with her arms folded, one fingertip on her lip, as if tasting the conversation. I felt her eyes on the back of my neck and pretended I hadn't. The last pin sat down with a little sigh. I turned the wrench the way you touch a sleeping animal, and the latch retracted quietly, as if we had both agreed not to embarrass it. The studio was a clean room for secrets. A drafting table with charcoal arranged like surgical instruments, a mannequin draped with a silk dress that had ideas, a safe in the wall behind a cheap painting of apples, so obvious it could have been a joke. I glanced at the safe the way doctors glance at an X-ray while pretending to check your pulse. "Doors open," I said. "Thank you," she said. She stepped past me into the room, and her perfume did the thing expensive perfume does when it's chosen by a person who deserves it. It acted like a thesis. Something with iris in the heart. something that told you yes without asking for permission. She put her palm flat against the safe behind the apples. She didn't say anything about it. Neither did I. "Anything else?" I asked, standing. She looked at me and then past me at the hallway, as if she could see the apartment from above. "Can you make a key from a lock you haven't seen?" she asked. "You can make a key from an impression," I said, "or from the story a lock tells the right wax, but it will never be a first draft." "I like revisions," she said, and there was a shadow behind her voice. She did not move. "Come back tonight. After 9, be a revision." There are cities where that line would have been a challenge. Here, it was an appointment. I left by the service elevator while a caterer argued with a tray. Back at the shop, I tried not to study the way her mouth had constructed my name. I cut blank keys for the building's likely cylinders, bagged a roll of impressioning wax, lined up graphite, marked the safe manufacturer in my head. I wrote a note to myself and didn't sign it. Don't invent doors where walls will do. It's a rule that keeps my hands honest and my nights uncomplicated. I broke the rule. After 9, the doorman had gone to whatever station chairs go to when they've earned a rest. I was a man with a tool bag and a suit that apologized for being clean and shoes that kept their secrets. Lena opened the door in a blouse that had an opinion about light and trousers that could file a complaint. Barefoot, her toenails painted practical. "I like your hands," she said, as if she'd been thinking about it all afternoon. "They look like they mean it." "Mostly," I said. "Show me the lock that wants a key." She led me back to the studio. This time she closed the door behind us, and the hallway turned into absence. She slid the apples aside and touched the safe like a cat touches a closed bedroom door. "It's mine," she said. "Not because it was a gift, because I decided it." "Then it gets to open for you," I said. I pressed wax to the keyway and turned until the pins told me where they ached. The impression came back with 5 little bruises where secrets live. I cut, filed, tried, filed again, and listened to the story get shorter. My shoulder brushed her hip once when I leaned to blow brass dust off the bench. She didn't move. Neither did I. The key turned like a soft laugh. The door gave up its hold. Inside, a leather folder the color of dark sugar, a velvet box heavy enough to start a rumor, a single photograph in black and white, a slim fountain pen, a passport, an envelope. Nothing looks more like intention than an envelope heavy with paper someone is scared to touch. She took out the photograph and held it by the corner. 2 people at a cafe, the man's hand on the woman's knee under the table as if the table were a conspiracy. Adrian, younger, but not so young. The woman, younger, too, young enough to explain his posture. Lena looked at the picture the way you look at a fire you've already decided not to put out. "Is this the part where you say you're sorry?" she asked me. "I'm a locksmith," I said. "I don't do absolutions." "Good," she said. She placed the photo face down on the drafting table and opened the envelope. She didn't offer it to me. I didn't ask. She read, breathed once in, and folded the letter again with the neatness of someone who keeps things in boxes they chose themselves. When she turned back to me, her face was the kind that wins trials. She came close enough that I could count the tiny notes in her iris and the place where a single freckle had decided to be a signature. "Do you sleep with clients?" she asked, not teasing. "I have a rule," I said, "but rules are just locks with good marketing." "And your key?" she asked. "Consent, truth, and clean sheets," I said, "in that order." Her mouth tilted. "We have 2 out of 3, she said, and touched the 3rd with her smile. I should tell you I refused. I should tell you I had an appointment with the version of myself that walks straight lines. But the room had decided to change sizes, and her shoulder had decided to be a map I already knew. I put my finger under her chin and lifted just enough for us to meet in a place that wasn't a question. I won't catalog us. The body deserves some privacy. I will say this. She was precise the way architects are precise and generous the way forgivers are generous. We didn't hurry. We learned. Her breath slowed where my hand knew to slow, and the world outside the studio lost its jurisdiction. When she came undone, it was with her eyes open, as if refusing to miss her own decision. When I followed, it was with my name in her mouth, as if she decided to keep it for later. After, we lay on the rug like two thieves who return everything but the nerve. The safe yawned. The apples watched us without blinking. "Adrian doesn't cheat," she said, tracing an invisible key on my chest. "He outsources intimacy to newness. He believes novelty is a form of charity. He told me once that fidelity is a good story told convincingly." "And what do you believe?" I asked. "That locks are only honest when you cut them yourself," she said. "That's what the prenup addendum says." She tapped the letter. "If he breaks the narrative publicly in his way or mine, the money goes where I tell it to, and the museum gets its wing." "You called me to open your decision," I said. "I called you because you listen to metal when it whispers," she said, and then she laughed, short and soft. "And because I wanted to see if your mouth matches your hands." We were still laughing when the apartment changed temperature. You can feel a front come through without opening a window. A door closed somewhere with the certainty of a man who thinks his keys are the weather. "Adrian," she said, not afraid. She stood, calm and barefoot, and handed me my shirt like it was choreography. "Closet," she said, and the kindness in her voice almost made me say no. I didn't get into the closet. I went to the door and listened. His footsteps came down the hall with the cadence of a person who has never been told to be quiet. He stopped outside the studio, tried the handle, and found it unambitious. "Lena," he called. "The contractor sent the wrong marble." "In here," she said, the kind of composed you have to rehearse. She opened the door just enough to step out and closed it behind her with a click. I heard his voice, smooth, reasonable, the expensive kind of tired, and hers, bright and narrow, a blade in a polite sheath. The conversation moved into the kitchen. I dressed quickly, locked the safe. I'm not an animal, and palmed the duplicate key I had made, a habit I could pretend was professional. On the way out, I paused by the credenza. The bowl held that single key still, gleaming like a dare. The next morning, she sent a message that knew the right number of words. "Tonight. 11. Bring rekeying kits and something that knows how to be quiet." I packed cylinders like contraband and drove to an address across town, Marceau headquarters, a slab of quiet glass that thought it was above ordinary light. She met me at the service entrance in a coat that made night look provincial. "What am I doing?" I asked. "Changing his story," she said, "and mine." We moved through hallways that smelled like printers and ambition. Her pass opened doors that made tactical beeps. In his corner office, dusk lay down along the desk like a cat. I changed the core on the inner door that led to the private lounge, an expensive euphemism, and set the old cylinder in my bag. She stood at the window and watched the city decide which buildings to keep. "He has two everythings," she said softly. "Two phones, two promises, two futures. It's always a blessing until it's a hazard." "What happens when he tries the old key?" I asked. "He discovers that novelty can lock him out," she said. "He walks the assistant down here. The assistant calls the building. The building calls you. You let them in publicly. The cameras notice." "And you?" I asked. "I am at home reading the prenup addendum to the piano," she said, and something like mischief passed through her face. The cameras noticed that too. The plan didn't need me to be noble. It needed me to be accurate. I am very good at accurate. The call came the next afternoon. A frantic assistant, a stuck door, an impatient executive. I drove over in my working clothes and my working face and shook Adrian's hand like we had never met in a photograph. He was handsome in the way tax brackets are handsome. He stood too close, then remembered that I wasn't in his category and stepped back. "Just do it quickly," he said. I did. The lounge door opened like a confession. The woman on the couch stood, young enough to explain his posture, old enough to know better, his cologne on her hair like an argument. The building manager apologized to the heir. The assistant pretended to have left her eyes at home. Someone from PR tried to get between my toolkit and the truth. It's funny how quietly rooms explode. No shouting, just the sound of narrative-changing clothes. I packed up my tools and left by the service stairs, brass dust on my fingers and a grin I didn't let the security camera keep. Lena texted that evening, "Come by, bring nothing but yourself." She opened the door in a robe that insisted on being taken seriously. She didn't say hello. She put her hand on my chest and pushed me gently back against the wall as if testing its load-bearing capacity. We kissed in the hallway like people who had earned it. The robe argued its case. I let it win. We found the studio because the apartment wanted to point us there. On the way, we passed the credenza. The bowl was empty. "What did you want from me?" I asked later, lying on the rug that had learned our names. "A locksmith," she said, "and a witness, and a man who knows the difference." "What did you want from him?" I asked. "A door that wasn't a mirror," she said. "He kept giving me windows." She gestured to the safe, newly closed, the apples back on their nail. "I moved the money where it buys excuses I can live with," she said. "A women's shelter gets a floor. A composer I love gets time. I get a lease in a building with terrible light and neighbors who water my plant when I forget I own one." "And me?" I asked, not because I needed an answer, but because some questions are locks you owe the courtesy of opening. She reached into the pocket of the robe and pulled out a small velvet pouch. Inside, a padlock, matte black, the shackle wrapped in silk thread. "I had this made," she said, rolling it in her palm. "It's useless. It opens with anything that knows how to be gentle. It's a reminder." "Of what?" I asked. "That some locks are for keeping," she said, and pressed it into my hand. "And some are for playing." She moved out 2 weeks later. The gossip columns got the letterhead and the elevator camera and the statement about evolving narratives. They did not get the photo of the two under-table hands or the sound her breath made when she learned my name like a new language. The museum got a wing. The shelter got beds. I got a small black padlock that doesn't keep anything I don't want to lose. People still ask me for keys that will make their lives behave. I cut the metal, file the edges, brush on graphite to make them feel like kindness. I tell them locks are suggestions. I tell them doors are decisions. I rarely tell them that sometimes, in rooms that have learned to be honest, the right hand on the right latch is a kind of consent. On nights when the shop feels smaller than I intended, I take the velvet lock out of my drawer and turn it in my fingers like a coin. It opens every time. It has never once lied to me, even when I wanted it to. I hang it on the pegboard above my bench where only I can see it, and I listen to the street settle. Somewhere, a couple negotiates with their breath. A piano decides whether to forgive. A safe keeps something safe because someone asked it to, not because someone deserves it. And in a high apartment where light still behaves, a woman in a robe she chose herself opens her window and lets the air in without checking whether anyone else approves. That's not a lock. That's what you open once without ever needing a key again.